Okay, so hi. So thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Esteves-Sabic, and I'm the co-founder of RISE, Ubuntu Network. And together with NextGen, we are co-creating and doing these webinars, on the topic of inequalities and transformation within our social networks and eco-village movements, and really how to tackle this big elephant in the room, and how to build these bridges, healing and reconciliation. So basically, this is a space where we get to share and we get to learn from each other and we get to support each other. And today I'm facilitating with Teresa Hallgren from Sweden, and she's going to be our timekeeper and making sure everything is going smoothly. And thank you, Teresa, for your time. And yeah, I'm not sure how many people we have online as yet. So what I'm seeing is John Creighton. So hi, John. I don't know if you can hear us. And rules of engagement is, if you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. And to mute it, you have to go down. You see dots there, and then you just click on it, and then it just goes mute. And if you want to say something and you want to ask questions, you can just unmute yourself. And what's going to be happening is beautiful Anna, thank you for joining us and for sharing with us. And I'm just going to introduce Anna, and we read her bio. And Anna will be presenting and sharing with us her knowledge. And after that, we're going to have time for questions and answers as well. And depending on how much time we have left, we can also enter into discussions. So we are looking at going to an hour and a half, longest is 2 hours. So Ana Margarita Esteves is a researcher at the Center of International Studies of the University Institute of Lisbon and guest assistant professor of the Department of Political Economy of the same institution. She has a PhD in sociology from Brown University, USA. Her research and teaching encompasses the relations between the social and solidarity economy, the commons, and the sustainability transition movements, synergies between nature, culture, and technology, and the application of critical pedagogies, as well as strategies of non-formal education to social mobilization and the promotion of participatory democracy. She is the founder and member of the International Editorial Committee of the journal Interface, a journal for and about social movements. She's also a member of the RC47, Social Classes and Social Movements of the ISA International Sociological Association, and part of its editorial platform, Open Movements, Open Democracy. And so, yeah, that's like a mouthful. And I know Anna from the Commons movement and also from the Eco-Village movement. And we are always, I think what brings me together, Anna, besides sisterhood, is this sense of seeing this need to really go into deep discussion about this topic of, for me, it's really more transition, a transition from the old to the new, and making sure that we are not repeating patterns as we are creating this new world, and that we talk about these uncomfortable things of race, inequality, and the more we talk about them is the more we can learn from each other, and is the more we can really come up with sustainable solutions of how do we go forward, how do we become a more cultural diverse earth that we're looking for. So Anna, I'm just gonna hand it over to you, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you, dear Nanti. Thank you, everyone who are now online. I realize that I already know some of you, for example, the participants of Tamara's Healing Biotope student program, whom I had the chance to meet in October when I gave a seminar in Tamara about the history of Portugal. And before I begin, I would like to tell two things to the participants for the sake of transparency. The first one is that I'm quite nervous today because a week from now, I'm traveling to the Philippines for a conference and research seminar on the topic of reimagining sustainability. And as you might have known by now, yesterday, the Tal volcano erupted. It hasn't erupted. It hasn't erupted in 42 years. So there's a huge column of smoke and fire in the sky. It's very symbolic. It's even initiatic, but it doesn't, I can't avoid feeling nervous and excited at the same time. There's beauty and terror in all of this. And I feel that what I have ahead of me is an initiatic journey. I hope the journey will really happen, that the Ninoy Aquino International Airport will not close down again. So you can imagine that I have butterflies in my stomach because of this. So please be aware of that. So I'm a little bit jittery. So I hope you all understand. And second place, I would like also for the sake of transparency to tell you where my deep motivation to study these topics of social justice, inclusion, and democratic participation in sustainability transitions come from. I was born and bred in Portugal, and I lived outside of the country for 17 years. I came back home in late 2014 after living in 5 different countries in 4 different continents. I'm also the daughter of internal migrants in my own country. Portugal is quite small compared to, most countries in Europe, and compared also to the countries where many of you come from, but still there's a lot of cultural diversity within the country, and a lot of diversity in terms of values. And my parents migrated in the 1970s, before I was born. My parents migrated from the central part of the country to the south to work in one of the most socially disruptive sectors of the capitalist economy, which is tourism. And, besides growing up in a community that was disintegrating to a large extent because of tourism, there was also a huge difference between the values I was taught at home and those of the local population. Despite being from the same country, from the same ethnic group, and speaking the same language. And this kind of led me to the impression that I was kind of banned and forbidden to enjoy the enormous natural beauty and also the strong community spirit which surrounded me and which was still surviving despite all the pressures from the tourist industry. And also I must confess that the best childhood memories I have, the best memories from my childhood and my adolescence are from the summer and Christmas holidays I spent in my grandparents' village, where the traditional community spirit was still alive and strong at the time. And this led to a lifelong search for community. Okay, so after telling you about my deep motivations so that you can understand where I come from, and so that you can also understand any bias I might have in my research and in my presentation, I'm now going to, share the slides with you. Do you prefer that I share the slides, or that I just keep the view of my face and my room? Should I proceed to the slides?
I'm not sure which feels comfortable to you. Maybe if you feel like talking to us and we see, that's fine. That's also fine. Okay, you don't have to look at the slides.
I like conversations.
Yeah.
My slides are speaking notes. Maybe if any of you has any question, or if there's, I'm not an English native speaker, so I have a strong accent. I'm aware of that. So, and maybe, you know, my grammar or my phrasing is not like, you know, top notch. So if any of you, and I like to keep it informal and human. So if any of you, yes, so Anastasia is suggesting that I share the slides here so that we can have access to them and still be able to watch. I wonder if I can upload files anywhere here on Zoom, in the chat, for example. Let me see.
Yeah, in the chat, you can do that. We can
Share
link it.
Meeting. Okay, so I'm going to share the slides right now, and I'll just keep the slides on my screen so that I can have them as speaking points.
Okay.
Okay, just a moment.
Okay, and we will also share them later and
Sure.
upload them on the website as well.
Okay, so yeah, someone is also suggesting that Jonathan is suggesting that I share the slides later via email.
For sure, we'll do that. We'll definitely do that.
Maybe, do you mind if I just upload the slides? Because Anastasia asked that. Maybe she would like to take a look at them if she has any doubts. Okay, so I'm just going to upload them. This will take just a moment. Okay. I just uploaded the slides. Okay, so let's go for it. Okay, in my research about sustainability, or better, regenerative transitions, sorry, I also have a bit of a cold. I've been looking a lot into evolution, into research on evolution. And from my research, I've been realizing that all the work that has been done on evolutionary theory can be summarized into perspectives on what life is about, on what the major what are the major dynamics of life, what makes life go forward, what makes life evolve. One of them is the perspective of life as conflicts, the idea of power over, the idea of the so-called survival of the fittest, which was put forth by Charles Darwin and which during the 19th and 20th century was interpreted as power over by the so-called strongest over the so-called weakest. And this kind of interpretation has been used to justify colonialism, has been used to justify a hierarchization of human beings into a kind of hierarchy of worth and of deserving, and of deserving to access opportunities for the full fulfillment and the full expression of their own human potential. And it has also been the driving idea behind capitalism. The idea that life can evolve, that humanity, or better, one part of humanity can express its true potential by extracting and accumulating biophysical value from living beings, extracting that biophysical value and extracting their biophysical energy and accumulating it as value, and also through the maximization of individual outcomes, while externalizing wastes, while externalizing all the negative outcomes, all the destruction and all the debris from this process. Behind this idea of life as conflict, which underlies capitalism, and also and also the individualistic methodology, the methodological individualism that is behind it, is the idea of life as a zero-sum game of hierarchy and exclusion. Then there's also the perspective of life as cooperation, of power with. The idea that the maximization of human potential can only be achieved through an alliance with other beings, with other human beings and also other living beings, through circular exchanges, feedback loops between components of an organic system, and a kind of community, and a kind of through a kind of methodological communitarianism. The idea that all living beings in a biotope or in an ecosystem or a bioregion constitutes a kind of organic system that is bound through exchanges, in which there is no waste, in which all the activities and all the metabolism is interconnected. Waste is not cast aside, the debris is not cast aside. Even the destructive outcomes are not cast aside, but are regenerated and turned into new life through a kind of process of recycling, through synergies. Is this clear?
Yeah.
So this paradigm of power with, of methodological communitarianism, has implicit the idea that life can be a win-win game through an inclusion in the commons, through the principle stated by Karl Marx, from which according to their abilities, to which according to their needs. This principle is not exclusive to Marxism and to socialism as it was practiced in the Soviet Union, in the Eastern Bloc, in Cuba, and so on. It's also implicit in the regenerative paradigm, in the integral paradigm, which underlies the rediscovery of community that is going on within the permaculture and eco-villages movement. And also, it's being advocated by people who are going back into the work of Charles Darwin and realizing that what he meant when he talked about the survival of the fittest is not really, power over and the domination of the so-called strongest over the weakest. No, actually, there's a realization amongst evolutionary theorists that the fittest are actually those who are the most able to cooperate. Is this clear so far? Are there any questions? I hope that I'm not using a language that is too academic or too complicated. Is it okay so far? Good. Okay.
No, wonderful.
Sorry?
It's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so please, interrupt me anytime you need, or please, or tell me, okay, use a different kind of language. You're welcome to do that.
Thank you, Anna.
You're welcome. But still, in recent years, there has been a kind of maturation within the permaculture and eco-village movement and in the transition movement in general, through the realization that, okay, by trying to build community doesn't already mean you're enlightened. And also, the realization that the logics of power over and power with are not binary opposites. There has been a realization that actually the symbol of the yin and yang, in which light and darkness, in which the two binary opposites are kind of intertwined and interfeeding each other, is really present in our everyday lives. And that by building community, we are not automatically isolating ourselves from the cultural and material pressures of capitalism, of patriarchy and colonialism. And also there has been a realization within the eco-villages movement and also other community-based initiatives that, that we are not isolated from the system that we want to change, that we experience the influence of structural power relations, state politics, and also all the hierarchies and all the boxes that supports that system. And as the movement develops and matures, there's a great acknowledgement of these pressures, of the permeability between, the so-called new culture experiments and the old culture system, and of how power, ranking, hierarchy, and the dynamics of inclusion and exclusion permeate eco-villages and other community-led initiatives of transition. You can see that being codified, for example, in the educational material of GEN and of Gaia Education, in the Eco-Village design education curriculum, for example, and also in Gaia Education Sustainability Design Education program. There are whole chapters dedicated to the question of ranking, to the question of hierarchy, and how that is implicit in the everyday life of communities, and how that needs to be made transparent as the result of the permeability of these initiatives towards the largest system, the incumbent institutional and structural forces that we are entangled with, and also there's also a growing acknowledgement of how do we carry that system and those forces within us, and we reproduce that behavior in our everyday lives, even in communities, even in circles of transparency, even among people who thrive for a greater awareness and of changing themselves and the way they relate to others. And by looking at this, we have to look at the inherent paradoxes of countercultural intentional communities. This is in slide number 3, if any of you is reading the slides right now. In first place, there's published research which shows how building these intentional communities implies very large-scale mobilizations of capital and material resources, and how they often face significant regulatory and institutional barriers. In many ways, we are swimming against the current. And in order to build this new world we dream of, we have to mobilize resources from the mainstream. And these resources are finite. So in order to be able to do that, we require leaders with very strong mobilizational skills and privileged access to financial and political power, to financial and political capital within the system, as well as access to sources of expertise and technology. And this has a catch in it. Leaders and the people who hold this social capital and this cultural capital, and even this cultural capital, which allows them to access all those resources that we need in order to reconstruct community, and in order to build win-win dynamics, tend to accumulate a lot of power. And the work of Fred Turner, and according to Fred Turner, a sociologist from Stanford University, when countercultural intentional communities do not acknowledge this power, do not make it transparent, they tend to reproduce within their internal dynamics the hierarchies and exclusionary tendencies existing within wider societies. This sociologist made a large-scale study of intentional communities which were built during the 1960s and the 1970s. And he realized that most of them tended to be led by Western white males from middle and upper class backgrounds. And that they tended to reproduce the same dynamics of patriarchy, of patriarchal relations, and even class and race exclusion within the very same communities, despite the good intentions, despite the intention to create something totally different and far more egalitarian and exclusive. I would like to know if any of you is familiar with the work of Pierre Bourdieu, a French sociologist, and his concept of habitus and capital. Has anyone ever heard of Pierre Bourdieu? Yes, Anastasia? Anastasia, would you like to share, and Adeline as well? Okay, so would you like to share with the others what you know about Pierre Bourdieu, and especially if you are aware of the concept of habitus, and also of how Pierre Bourdieu interprets the concept of capital. For him, capital is not just financial capital. It's also symbols. It's also a way of acting, which makes you fit in within certain environments, and therefore gives you access to certain groups and to certain key resources. Okay, those of you who heard of Pierre Bourdieu, would you like to share what you know about him and his concept of habitus? Anastasia, Adeline, you don't have to, but if you want. Hi.
I can try.
Yes.
I did not expect this. So the way I understand the concept of habitus is in a way, an entrenched way of doing things that is not completely self-critical, in the sense that the way the things are done, the way that, let's say, is the common way of doing it, and in that context. And I think it's, unlike what they would say is the practices in eco-villages, it's not that conscious. So it can obviously be changed, but it kind of derives from the context in which the practices are taking place.
Exactly. And it's embodied. It's embodied in the way, you know, in the way you carry yourself, in the way you interact with others. It's also embodied in your values and in the way you live your values, in your predisposition towards certain behaviors or other behaviors. You know the expression, he or she is one of us or is not one of us. And also the idea that and also the term that is very often used in New Age circles, the idea of resonance between people. You know, those symbols that you carry with you in the way you dress, in your body language, in the way you speak, which create empathy or which constitute a block to the creation of empathy with others and from the part of others. Those keys which open people's heart. Yes, it's physiological, like Jonathan says, it's psychological, it's social, and it's economic. I very strongly recommend all of you to try to read Pierre Bourdieu's work. It can be a little bit dense, but fortunately, there are resources on the internet which kind of translate his work into lay language, so that it is accessible not only to sociologists like me or anthropologists or other social scientists, but also people who care about these issues of social inclusion and exclusion. Okay, so you have this topic, this big elephant in the room, which is the centrality of leaders with the strong mediation skills and with a habitus which allow them privileged access to resources from the system that are needed to build an intentional community, to build an eco-village or another countercultural community project. Okay, so it seems that in order to change the world, in order to change the system, you already need to have a kind of more or less privileged position in it. And also, you need to attract people who want to work with you, or you need to be comfortable working with the people who are at the center of this process and who are able to mediate between the community and the incumbent system and its power structures and its institutional structures. And that's why, according to another scholar called Levasseur, eco-villages tend to be susceptible to self-selective homogeneity, to a kind of dogmatic purity, and to assuming away cultural differences, to the point that they experience high rates of attrition and failure. There's a kind of self-selection among the people who stay. They tend very much to resemble those which holds this kind of social capital and cultural capital, which allow them to mediate between the community and the system. And also, let's look at the origin of the eco-village model and of the global eco-villages and of the global eco-village network. You know, this is a really case study on how privilege within an incumbent system allows you to have access to the material and the symbolic goods, and also to the social networks that allow you to carry forward and to materialize a transformative project. Okay, so as many of you might know, the Global Eco-Village Network results from an international study of sustainable communities, which was carried out in the late 1980s by the Context Institute, and which was funded by the Gaia Trust, a private foundation that is headquartered in Denmark, of all places. And I'm sure you also know that the headquarters of the Global Ecovillage Network are based in Findhorn in Scotland, where the founding conference of GEN took place in 1995. So the Ecovillage model is a kind of ideal model. It's a concept that emerged from the global north, and that is somehow inspired by a predominantly post-materialistic vision, resulting from an understanding of community and environmental problems that is typical and that is inherent to the global north, to its intellectual circles and also its activist circles, and that it is inspired by the desires and by the longings of activists in the global north, mainly from a middle class background, for a different world, for a world in which they will be able to fulfill, emotional and social needs, which were cast aside by the dynamics of capitalism. Is this clear so far? Okay, and despite the fact that GEN has expanded from the global north into the global south, there's GEN Africa, there's Casa Latina in Latin America, there's GEN Asia, and there's also a GEN hub emerging in the Middle East. And despite the fact that despite the fact that you have a lot of traditional villages and urban neighborhoods that are now part of GEN and are integrating the eco-village model in their efforts of transitioning towards sustainability, and more than that, transition towards a regenerative culture, there's still a predominance of this post-materialistic aspect, of these post-materialistic aspects of culture, and of this post-materialistic idea of community and of transition towards a sustainable culture. And also, there has been an awareness since the beginning that there is no ideal eco-village in the world, that no eco-village in the world, be it an intentional community built for the purpose of satisfying post-materialistic aspirations, and this is what predominates in the global north, be it a traditional village or urban neighborhood in global south that is implementing that model in its transition. No community on earth so far fully embodies the eco-village model as it was defined by GEN. Is this clear so far? And this brings forth a lot of questions, especially regarding the way in which the eco-village model is being implemented in non-Western communities. Issues of horizontality, grassroots democracy, and transparency. How can we integrate, native knowledge and traditional knowledge into this model? How can we adapt the idea of community, of circle, of the tools for promoting transparency, and also the tools and institutions for democratic participation in non-Western communities that have very different values about how communities should be structured, which have a very different approach to the idea of authority, to the idea of gender, and to the idea of voice. For example, a few weeks ago, I was speaking with a colleague of mine at the Center for International Studies, an anthropologist who has been doing a lot of fieldwork in Senegal. And he told me that recently, during his last visit of Senegal, and by the way, he's Portuguese, but his wife is from Senegal, so he knows the country really intimately. During his last visit, which happened over the Christmas break, he spoke with a young woman from the Czech Republic who's currently a volunteer for GEN, and is working with Ecovillages there in Senegal. And he says that what he noticed was that there was a huge question mark about how to integrate the structures for grassroots participation developed within GEN, and which are taught, for example, through the Ecovillage design education, in traditional villages where the so-called marabout, the traditional healer, or the tribal leader, the tribal elder, or the traditional religious authority has a central role and is seen by the community as a pillar and has the last voice in how the community affairs are managed. And also, we have to take into account that the way in which gender and age and the role of age groups is framed in Senegal is completely different than in Europe, for example, where these concepts were initially framed. So there's this question of how to marry the post-materialist concept of community with traditional knowledge, and also with the fact that when you step out of predominantly middle-class circles, you will meet people whose main concern is to survive, is to make sure that the next day and the following day and the following week, they will be able to put food on the table, not only for themselves, but also for their children. And that their main concern is, basic survival, not the promotion of post-materialist goals. So there's a growing awareness. I know that there's a growing awareness within the Ecovillages movement of the need to develop this kind of sensibility, to be sensitive to values that result not only from traditional knowledge and culture, but also from the material conditions. And also, the preoccupation of not to impose post-materialistic values related, with beauty, with human interactions, with harmony with nature and so on people who don't know if they'll be able to eat tomorrow or to have a roof over their heads tomorrow. And right now I'm thinking of the thousands of people who have been displaced by the Taal volcano in the Philippines, and that I might encounter huge refugee camps next week when I travel to the Philippines, inshallah, hopefully. I hope I'll be able to travel. Yes, okay, let's go on. I hope I'm not rumbling or mumbling too much with these topics. Is this okay so far? Is this being clear? Yes, Jonathan just wrote something really important. As the middle class declines due to growing social inequalities, and this is very true, in number, and as natural sources also decline, our interest will focus more and more on the basic needs and on survival. Great point, Jonathan. Jonathan, thank you so much. So that means that even in the bubble that is the industrialized West, there will be a growing awareness of the need to think of basic survival and of the here and now, and less on how to fit into into a community that strives for enlightenment. So this means that maybe this might teach people with a lot of privilege how to empathize with people who do not have the privilege to think so much about aesthetics and about spirituality. Okay, so hold on, let me move forward. Okay, so a good thing about the Ecovillages movement is that it's based on a cosmopolitan and non-essentialist vision of community and culture, in which rootedness in territories and ecosystems take precedence over identity concerns and arbitrary political boundaries. However, it suffers from a kind of biocentrism and a kind of, and a kind of centeredness on psychological dynamics in its explanation of social change and social dynamics that tends to underestimate issues of political economy and power. So maybe it's a good idea. It's a good idea that in the eco-village movements, people start reading Pierre Bourdieu and also Karl Marx, for example, or better, Cornelius Castoriadis. I can write his name here. Cornelius Castoriadis. He's a neo-Marxist Greek thinker who has been writing a lot about the relationship between, between class, between structural power relations and ecology. So he's a great resource as well. Okay, and now I would like to ask you, whom among you lives or has already lived in an eco-village? Could you please raise your hand or say something? 1, 2, 3. Who else? Adeline, Scott, 4, Emily as well, John, Sarah Lang, Anastasia. Yes, I know Emily's right now in Tamara, right? Anastasia for 2 months only. Where exactly? Oh, Emily's in London. Oh, you mean she's in London right now? Okay, she might come back later. Okay, sure. I would like to go back to the question of resource mobilization. We have to take into account that permaculture-based techno-energetic systems have a limited capacity to produce surplus, therefore to accumulate the capital that is necessary to, to invest in the creation of a community, especially to invest in the creation of its infrastructure, in comparison to techno-energetic systems based on fossil fuels and translocal supply chains. So therefore, this is why, the issue of resource mobilization from the system is so important. And how are eco-villages doing this nowadays? Mainly by, selling knowledge, selling their accumulated knowledge on how to build community. Educational programs, both through through the eco-village design education, through education on permaculture, education on, on community building. In the case of Tamara, also programs on love, sexuality, and personal relations among community members. Also courses on ecological building and so on. And also by providing consultancy. So, and another major source of resources is philanthropy, the establishment of worldwide networks of donors, of supporters, of people and organizations who are inspired by their experience and who are willing to give them money, if possible, on a regular basis, to ensure the development of the project and its continuity. And another source as well for some more developed eco-villages is public funds from national governments, funds from international corporations. For example, the national level eco-village program in Senegal, or the current pilot program in the Spanish region of Navarra, which I think, Nonti, you know quite well, because you lived in Artera Bizimodo, right? You might be able to tell us a little bit about that. So here comes the question: how do villages relate to these power and institutional regimes? Since they have to be in good terms with the system in order to be able to access its resources, to what extent are eco-villages really transformational? To what extent are they able to, to transform structural power relations, not only within themselves, but also in the system at large? So do they really represent something new in terms of power relations? So, or are they really bringing forward change? And before I go on to a case study that I've been studying for years, I would like to ask you if you hear a kind of buzzing sound in the background, because there's some construction work happening just outside my door. Do you hear a buzzing sound? Okay, so you don't hear the buzzing sound, you don't hear any sound? Good, because there's a really irritating sound outside my door and I was concerned that you could hear it. If you do, please let me know. Yes, so Jonathan just wrote, yes, how do we share this power? How do we share this power that is raised through social capital and cultural capital? Okay, so right now I would like to tell you about the research I did in Tamera, which I know Emily knows quite well because she's part of the Healing Biotope student program, right, Emily? Yeah, and I believe we met when I gave that seminar about the Templar history in Portugal in October, right? Yeah, if you have time, Emily, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your experience in the Healing Biotope program after the presentation, maybe during the Q&A. Someone wrote something? Yes, I don't hear any. Okay, good, perhaps, fine. Okay, so in 2017, I published an article in the Journal of Political Ecology, which is available online for free, called Commoning at the Borderland. And in this article, I analyzed Tamera as a borderland between two cultures and also between two very distinct socioeconomic realities. It's a borderland which divides two different cultures and even two very different biotopes. But it's also a borderland where two cultures make contact and meet. So, so the case study was, so in my case study, my core question was, what kind of relationships do we emerge between the eco-villages, local populations, and public authorities as a result of the introduction of forms of resource management that are not foreseen in existing regulations? And also in that kind of process of often unconscious self-selection in the recruitment of participants in the educational programs, in the recruitment of community members, but also in the recruitment of donors that support the community. Is it clear so far? Did I phrase it well? Yeah, please interrupt me if anything is not clear. Okay, so I started analyzing how did the development of Tamera in southwestern Portugal created that kind of borderland where two cultures and two ecological realities meet, in the first place distinguish themselves and then meet. I realized that the Tamera's project and its trajectory does not emerge from local grassroots processes of collective action, but that it is a prefigurative process that results from the, from the transplantation of an ideal type of a sustainable human settlement from Central Europe, from Germany, to southwestern Portugal. And this ideal type, which was transplanted from Central Europe to southwestern Iberia, is the healing biotope model. And this process happened within a regulatory void and created a kind of cultural exchange and resulted in a kind of cultural estrangement from the local population, to the point that for 10 years, Tamera, since 1990, between 1995 and 2005, Tamera focused on the development of its own internal model and processes. And only after 2005 did it make an effort to reach to the outside and to create a bridge with the surrounding region. Okay, so, Sarah Lang is asking, it's probably a good idea to explain prefigurative. The term prefigurative means, to act as if the transformation you want to see in the world has already happened. Is this clear?
Yeah.
It's to prefigurate the social transformation you wish to see happening. Is to act as if the psychological transformation within yourself, as if has already happened. It's a way of acting as if, the explicit and implicit power relations existing within your community have already been changed, and it is acting as if, the institutional changes, meaning the laws and the regulations that prevent that change from happening have already happened. Is this clear? I also hope that I'm not boring you or, with these terms and with my pace of speaking. Please give me feedback. I'm open to it. I hope I'm being able to keep your attention. It's good so far? Good. Yeah, please keep on, please give me feedback. Okay, so there was a regulatory void. There were no, there were no institutional structures within the Cuban system which could hold the process. And also Tamara brought a totally different way of brought a totally different way of seeing human relations, a way that is totally different from the patriarchal and heteronormative values of the surrounding villages. Villages that are impoverished, culturally homogeneous, and also aging due to rural exodus. In contrast to those villages where you find mainly old people, where women tend to stay at home with their children and grandchildren, where you find mainly older men in public spaces, and where women who are unaccompanied in public spaces are kind of, especially, these neo-rural countercultural types tend to be judged by the local population as being, dissolute, as being, people who are kind of shocking. People who are kind of in a shock with their own traditional values. Besides the presence of Tamara in the region, by attracting mainly visitors from Central Europe, from North America, from Israel, from industrialized countries, and by practicing prices which are more, at the level of the income of Central Europeans and not Southern Europeans, they tended to attract a lot of people who, who ended up buying land in the region, therefore leading to a rising of land values, to a gentrification of the area. Okay, they brought a lot of clients to local businesses, so they helped to, they brought a new energy to the local economy. There were a lot of new restaurants being open to cater to their needs and to their inclinations. For example, vegetarian owners, organic vegetarian restaurants, organic bakeries, and so on. And okay, there has been a kind of economic renewal in the region. But on the other hand, that happened at the expense of a kind of gentrification. And also we have to take into account that English is the language most used in gatherings and public events. Still, Germany is the most spoken language within the community, to the point that non-native speakers of German often reported feeling a kind of sense of cultural marginalization and exclusion. This is not intentional. This is a kind of non-intentional process that happens as a result of the culture and also of the class and also of the signifiers that you carry with you. So this is not an accusation. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone. This happens as a result of the fact that you embody a culture. You embody also what Pierre Bourdieu calls a class habitus. Okay, and also we have to take into account the following. that in order to participate in the often long, term educational programs of Tamara, you have to have a level of autonomy from the labor market and also a level of disposable income that is available mainly to people from a middle to upper class origin. And it really helps a lot if you're fluent in English. And it helps even more if you're fluent in German, especially if you want to become a community member. Being fluent in German helps you, for example, to have access to those jobs in the Christmas markets and also in other service industries that many Tamarians hold during the winter, as a way of raising the money they need to, to cover their daily expenses during the rest of their of the year, during the period while they are living in Portugal. Is this clear so far? Okay, so fencing. So I just talked about how the borderland was created. Now, how is Tamara bridging the borderland? One thing that I find really good and really noble, and which is something that that should be paid attention to, especially from the part of other eco-villages that are being created by intentional communities, is that Tamara is doing a conscious effort to reach out to the surrounding villages and also to reach out to the state. Since 2005, after 10 years of focusing on internal development, Tamara has become more diversified. In 2005, Tamara welcomed the first Portuguese community members, which were middle-class people from urban backgrounds who wanted to go back to the land. And these first Portuguese community members also helped to make a bridge between Tamara and the surrounding villages. First, they helped to translate Tamara's webpage into Portuguese, and also to create other communication, other media and communication material. They also helped to establish linkages with journalists, with documentary filmmakers, with political activists, and also with academic researchers. They helped to create a network within Portugal, which is helping Tamara not only with inside knowledge about the culture, about the local and national politics, and also about the way the institutions work, but are also helping to make Tamara more understandable to the general public. These community members are also helping to embed the community within the region by establishing an institutional dialogue. I know that one of them is part of the village assembly in Relíquias of what we call Junta de Freguesia. A kind of sub-municipal level assembly where people come and discuss with the local mayor on how to create law projects and also how to implement the law and also how to develop policy programs. And through that community member, Tamara is taking part in anti-poverty initiatives in the region. There are a lot of isolated elders who often suffer from famine, from malnutrition, and also from lack of access to medicine. So these programs aim to help them, accessing a balanced nutrition and also to have access to doctors and to medical help whenever necessary. That these community members are helping to create laws and to implement policies. And they are also helping to establish a culture, a culture bridge with the community, what I call cultural rapprochement. For example, by organizing joint sports and cultural events. Every year there are football matches between Tamara community members and local people from the surrounding villages. They organize football tournaments. The Tamara community choir sings at sings at the Catholic Church in Reliquias on Christmas Eve, which is quite beautiful. Also, I had the chance to be in Tamara in the summer of 2015. There were Tamara community members holding the image of the Madonna, of Our Lady, during the summer religious celebrations, celebrating the local patron saint, of the village. And the people who were holding the statue of the Madonna during the celebrations were actually Muslims. One of them was Aida Shibli, who's an Arab Palestinian woman living in Tamara. Another one was Ismail Assad, an Arab Palestinian man who's a friend of Tamara and was visiting at the time. And you also had, among the people who were holding the image, you also had German community members whom I know are not practicing Catholics. And this helps to bring forth a cultural bridge and also to develop trust between Tamara and the local people, who tend to be quite conservative. And also, since 2010, Tamara has been in a process with the municipal authorities to develop what they call the peer process, and a process to regulate the water retention landscape, and also to create regulations for future buildings within Tamara. And this is promoting a kind of, legal and regulatory innovation, which can be a benchmark for the development, not only for current eco-villages around the world, especially those created by intentional communities, those who do not result from pre-existing communities, but were created intentionally by a group of people who came together and who are creating it from the grassroots. And it also can help other eco-villages that already exist, but who need a framework to help them become, officially recognized by the state. Conclusions. Okay. First, that these processes of segregation are often not intentional. Second, that there's an emerging process of awareness of the way in which intentional communities often reproduce hierarchies and exclusionary mechanisms which exist within the wider system. And there are processes which are being put forth to make them transparent and to change them. This takes time. And that through this process, which we should not point fingers, we should not do a blame game, but instead recognize of how we carry, capitalism, patriarchy, racism, sexism, classism within us, and how we very often reproduce it without noticing. And we also be aware of how we carry within us symbols that result from our upbringing and which determine the extent to which we fit in or not within a group. And that the process of fitting in within a group often results in a kind of self-selection mechanism, which leads to a kind of homogeneity. A homogeneity which is very often determined by whether or not we fit in with the core community members, those community members who hold the social capital, the educational capital, and even the financial capital that allow the community to exist and allow the community to bridge with itself, with the system, and to mobilize the resources needed for it to develop. And also, another conclusion is that by making this transparent, by developing an awareness of this, and by creating, social tools to work on these topics, we will contribute to, to reverse this tendency for the concentration of power in core community members. And we will also contribute to reverse this tendency for homogeneity by consciously including people who are different from the core members without turning them into tokens to, in a way, okay, oh, look at us, we're so inclusive. Okay, by creating awareness and by working And by working on this without blame and in a gradual way, we will contribute to turning eco-villages into more inclusive processes, which will be able to, to carry forth the transformation into a post-capitalist and post-colonial and post-heteropatriarchal society that we wish for. That's it. I hope I didn't bore you too much. And I hope what I said was clear enough. I look forward to your feedback. Please be honest, brutally honest if needed. And I also looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Anna.
Okay, Emily just wrote something. I'm curious, what are the social tools that we can use to reverse a tendency of homogeneity without tokenization, both as students of eco-village programs and also as people who want to start eco-villages? Good question. I know there's forum. Tamara has been using the, the self-expression forum, the Self-Darstellung forum. I know there are other social technologies that are being developed. Nonti, would you like to give examples, for example? Would you like to give examples?
Well, I think just like my head right now is full of, I've been jotting down a lot of things that are important that you said. I think for me, what just comes out very strong for that question is that it takes time, and it's one of the things that you said as well. It takes time, but also there's a sense of a trick there. Like you said something very powerful at the end, is that to just like moving away from the illusion that we are already there, we have arrived. This idea of this dream we have of creating this new world. For me, as a person from the Global South, and as you know, we just came from Tamara with Dr. Robin DiAngelo to do the seminar on white fragility. Why is it so hard for white people to talk about racism? Of which I've been in the Eco-Village movement in the North, and it's a really hard topic. And I started to do this work because I saw that in some level, we are repeating patterns simply because we are humans. Yeah. And in the beginning, I felt that it would be, since we have all these tools and structure, the forums, as you say, where it's a space where you can be transparent and open and say how you feel. I really had this illusion that I can just be in these spaces of circles and healing and actually voice out my experiences without pointing fingers also, as you said, and just saying, this is my experience. I'm experiencing repetition of patterns, including unconscious racism, unconscious exclusion of people, using people as tokens. But then I realized that people were not ready to face that. And it was like a shocking experience for me. Then I realized that, yeah, it is in this sense of saying, no, we are not like that. The people who are like that don't live in the eco-villages, don't live, it's the people outside, you know? And it's almost like, no, it's us. We have this, we live in this world. We are from this patriarchal, capitalist world, and we have been brought up that way. We have been educated that way. So we need to somehow, even though we are in these movements and we want to create a new world, have this deep realization that we are not there yet, that it's still a process, and be willing and be open to have this really uncomfortable discussions and to look at ourselves, that we still carry these systems within us. And so I think it's really imperative that we realize that we are in the transition. We are in the transition to this new world that we want to create, that we are not there yet. I don't want to take too much space, but also I just wanted to say about the Eco-Village design education. It's very interesting that every time when we meet as the people of the Global South, there's always the topic of how do we transform the Eco-Village design education to adapt to the needs of the people of the Global South. But even within them, there's so much diversity in the global south that how do we really, especially as you mentioned, when it comes to the spiritual aspects of it, we have so many diverse ways of how villages are being run and who is the leader of the village and how do we do our own systems of governance that usually the EDE education does not really reflect us, people of the global south, and yet it's still a program that's still being rolled out.
Yeah.
People of, so it's also just having that awareness that there's still a lot of work to do as well, that we cannot just copy and adapt what we do in the eco-villages in the north or communities in the north and adapt them to the needs of the people of the global south, because the needs are completely different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I just uploaded 2 articles. One of them is Commoning at the Borderland, the one that I use actually to make the slides. And the other one is Peace Education in the Anthropocene, which is based on research I did among partners of Tamara in the West Bank. You were speaking about eco-villages in the global south, and okay, they are the same article. Okay, so I need to send the other one. The one on peace education is about the attempt to create a healing biotope in Israel-Palestine, which deals exactly with those topics. And it also includes information about the process of transitioning of Farha, a traditional village in the West Bank, into an eco-village. And for example, about the kind of, iffy attitude that local authorities are having regarding the institutional model of governance of the eco-village. So there are raised a huge question. Is it because they're still getting acquainted with the model? Or is it because somehow, it feels like an imposition on a form of governance that is totally different? And then, how do we adapt the local tradition local traditional ways of governing the community to the eco-village model? That doesn't mean that we should always keep things as they've always have been. We can make it more participatory and democratic, but we should not impose democracy as we see it.
Totally.
Yeah.
There was a question, yes, about sociocracy, the ways of governance.
Yeah. Yeah, hold on. I'm just going to share the other article, The Commoning at the Borderland, because it seems it didn't go through.
I just want to let people know that you can unmute yourself and you don't have to write down anymore. You can just say your questions and your thoughts processes as well.
I'd love to hear from the people.
Rather than just writing on the chat, you can just, Emily, you said you wrote something down and somebody else just wrote something down.
A lot easier as well to, instead
so
of
we have entered into the discussion, and if you have any questions for Anna as well, if you can just unmute and just speak.
Yeah. Yeah, Adeline just made a very important comment. It would be great if she could voice it.
Yeah.
And also Jonathan, he talks about dynamic governance. Yeah, I would love if he could tell us about what dynamic governance is about. And also his experience with sociocracy. I must confess that I've only done I've done a 2-day seminar, introductory seminar to sociocracy years ago, but it was just an introduction. So my knowledge is quite superficial. It would be great if Jonathan could tell us more about it.
Yeah.
Hi. Most of my experience with these kind of forms of governance come from an organization that meets perhaps once a year and kind of comes together to try to form decisions. And what we've kind of did over the last number of years is to form sub-councils And
what? Sorry?
I'm going to get my speaker over here and
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
jump back in. Sorry about that.
No
My partner's listening in, and the speaker was down in the kitchen. So most of my experience is in an organization that was a dispersed organization that got together once a year and made decisions in council all together. And then ultimately we had to make more decisions, and so broke into subgroups. And a lot of the decision-making process was held in individual subgroups. And so in studying that form, I came across the term sociocracy.
Mm-hmm.
To my understanding, is really rooted in a French movement that's quite old, and probably many of you are familiar with it. But again, my experience and my interest is in how do groups of people who do not necessarily live together, but come together for particular projects. How do they have inclusion of everyone's ideals, interests, cultures, orientations, when there isn't the level of intimacy that you might have, quote unquote, in an eco-village where people are living in an intact village. And I think the same is true for a village that is holding educational programs. And there tends to be this insider versus outsider kind of orientation. And some people just have more say than others. And I know Scott, who's on this call, has shared some thoughts with me about stewardship and how that has traditionally worked in intact cultures. But it's just interesting to me that there's levels of responsibility and there's levels of rights with those responsibilities, and how we do that when there are, if there's other forms of governance that enable people to have a full and equal say, or for lack of a better word, vote, when they may not be considered part of the inside group who are vested. That's really my question.
Good point. That's $1 million question. By the way, Jonathan, could you tell us where you're talking from? Where are you based, or where are you at the moment?
At the moment, I'm in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado.
Wow.
Where my partner has a tiny house.
Beautiful.
But my main project is on the slopes of Mount Shasta, where I have a camp that is a eco-regeneration camp. So part of our charge is to find a way to listen to the creatures and beings that have lived there for millennia who do not speak an English language or a human language. And so it even becomes more challenging in how do we listen to the needs of other beings that are not articulating themselves in human language.
Wow. So you were saying Mount Shasta, the one in California?
Yeah.
Okay. Which is a sacred mountain for the Native American, for the First Nations, right?
It's sacred for all of us. It's one of the key water sources of all of Northern California. And it is
sorry?
Water.
Yeah. Water circles.
Water. And so it really provides life for Northern California. And so it's incredibly sacred and important to all of us.
Wow.
And yet it has traditional, sacred qualities too.
Yeah, and I really hope I didn't insult the English language too much during my presentation.
Oh no, I insult it all the time. Even right now I'm using the word it, which kind of deanimates the mountain. And I probably should have some other pronoun.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that. It's a
Yeah.
question that is
It's complex.
yeah.
It's complex in many levels. I lived in a community where I could almost say our religion was sociocracy because we're just based on sociocracy.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, it's a great way of making decisions, of making sure everybody's included. But everything has its loopholes as well, and as well as I think sociocracy also makes it easy to define people who are in the core team, because if you are taking decisions and therefore you also have to be able to take responsibilities, the consequences of the decisions that you're making. So therefore, people who make decisions, who are part of the main circle, are the people that are willing and are actually saying we'll take responsibility of whatever consequences that come from the decisions that we make. So I think if you go deeper into sociocracy, you might maybe, I'm not saying 100% find an answer to your question, that you can include people, but there's different levels of including people into the decision-making circle. Not everybody can be part of the decision-making circle, but some people can just be involved in the everyday running of the space or whatever project you are doing. So we have like time right now is, well, in Spain, since we are all from all over the world, it's 4:22 p.m. So we have like, we can give it another like 15 minutes to 20 minutes of questions and answers. And then we're gonna have to close. And Sarah Lang has her hand. So please ask and share with us.
Yes.
And let us know where you're from.
Yes, please. Oh. And what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
If you could introduce yourself as well. Tell us a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm currently in Lakash, which is an intentional community eco-village in southern Mexico.
Oh, I know a few people.
Yeah.
You know, what's her name? A British woman who has been living in Tamara.
There aren't British women here right now. It was founded by a German woman and a Mexican woman.
Okay.
Germans are everywhere. This is what I learn as I travel.
Oh, Rachel Golden, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I am from the US of A, mid-north, which is traditional. Oh my goodness. This is always a test to see if I can remember this. Miami, Potawatomi, Menominee, and Peoria land in the Great Lakes region, now called Wisconsin, near Chicago. And what I've been, like, thank you so much, Ana Margarita and Nonti. And I've been thinking as I'm listening that we're almost asking questions at the wrong level. Like for me, if we're not asking the questions about how included people feel or how much of a say they have or whether it's power over or power with, if we're not asking those questions until we've already created a table with a culture that fits the relatively homogenous group that began it, then it's always going to be this more difficult question of how do we bring people in? Even things like sociocracy, even dynamic governance, like come from very particular cultures and very particular needs. And so it's like I've never come across a structure or a process that is like cultural, that doesn't have a culture, that doesn't feel more comfortable for some people than others and more inclusive for some people than others. And I've also seen how even really well-designed ones, like you were saying, Nonti, I worked in holacracy for a while, which is similar to sociocracy. And I still saw how like whiteness and male privilege and upper class privilege like still played out despite all of the like safeguards that were in place. And so as I look at like the eco-villages that I know of around the world, my question for you, Ana Margarita, and also Nonti, and people who know the eco-village landscape better than I do, is Like, is there any example that you know of where there was an intentional community or an eco-village that really came from a grassroots process of people that were there, came from them looking at their lived experiences, seeing what their struggles were, and then going through a process that we sometimes call politicization, which is like realizing that your problems aren't just yours, that they're shared locally, but also come from global systems, and then deciding to form some sort of intentional community out of that, because that's what I've been looking for, and I haven't seen it everywhere. It's usually someone from the global north in the global south, or if it's in the global north, it's just more privileged groups. And I instead think about tools like theater of the oppressed, or ones that really work with people on the issues that are most important to them, and showing them that it's not just them, and then seeing what they come up with and supporting them to see that through and continue asking, how can this be better? What are our issues now? How are these connected to issues elsewhere? Yeah, so I'm curious if you know of any examples, because I've been on the search.
Okay, I actually do. It's the settlements of the landless workers movement in Brazil. You might have heard of the MST. And they're a very interesting example. Actually, in
write that down, Anna. Sorry.
Okay. MST, Movimento dos Trabalhadores Rurais Sem Terra, Landless Workers Movement, Brazil. In 2016, after my fieldwork in Tamara, I had the huge privilege of sharing a flat in Santa Maria, a town in central Brazil, with two young women who grew up in one of those settlements and who were in town for university. They were studying agronomy. And they're eco-villages, and they're intentional communities, because they were developed by people who occupied land in large haciendas, in large land holdings that were being unproductive, and who then managed to get institutional recognition, and who created large agricultural cooperatives, and who are very successful in promoting agroecology and renewable energy technologies as well. And they're not as well known worldwide as they should be. And they're connected to Via Campesina. And I believe Jen should really get in touch with them, or if it has, I believe that Jen should really develop a deep cooperation with them. There's a lot to be learned. They're amazing people. However, there's also another class question. Okay, this movement results from the so-called ecclesial-based communities. Progressive Catholic communities inspired by liberation theology, in which progressive clergy, most of them from a middle-class background as well, mobilized peasants, poor peasants, to occupy land and create community. Inspired by, an interpretation of Christianity which claims that no one is able to achieve salvation alone, and that the biggest sin is social sin, not individual sin. And that redemption can only be achieved through structural transformation and by overcoming capitalism. And okay, these are beautiful communities, but it's also very difficult to fit in if you don't come from a working class or peasant background. And one thing that I noticed, for example, in a market in the town of Santa Maria, where it's a solidarity economy market, this market was created as a space of commercialization and also political mobilization. It's a space that was created for the commercialization of goods produced by people in social movements, including the landless workers movement. One thing that I noticed is that there's a kind of mistrust, and I'm even about to publish an article about this. There's a kind of mistrust between, between the workers, between the people of working class background in these movements and the middle class people who are part of the clergy or who are project managers and who were hired or who came to with the specific role to fulfill the specific role of coordinating these projects. Is this clear? And there has been a process, of rethinking the project in order to promote trust, in order to make these questions of class more explicit, more transparent, and to be able to work on it collectively. But one thing, for example, that makes the solidarity economy market in Santa Maria so successful is that actually the core coordinator is a nun, a lady in her late 60s, who comes from a peasant background. So she knows, all the codes, all the unspoken rules, she has the habitus. So she's a grassroots leader. She's what Antonio Gramsci called an organic leader or an organic intellectual. I'm going to write this name. This is important as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Anna. Any other questions before we are closed? Before we close?
Was my answer clear? Yes? Okay, good.
Okay.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I actually have a comment on this and then a question for Ana Margarida.
Your name, please, and where you're from?
Okay, sorry. My name is Anastasia. I'm currently in Transylvania, where I live. I wanted to comment that I think, so I'm researching eco-villages, and I've lived for a short period of time in one, and I visited a few in the meantime. But I do think that for the transition movement and from this political perspective, it's important to also, for us, the privileged ones from the north, white and so on, middle class, it's also important to understand that we don't really, or that we shouldn't, I think, overstep in the sense that I don't think there's a need, for example, for us to feel included in grassroots movements. I don't feel that would bring necessarily value to the movement, the transition movement. I think we should be aware of our place of our position of power and maybe not try to just infiltrate everywhere because we think we know better.
Exactly.
So I think we should respect other spaces. And then my question for Ana Margarida is very specific. Since I'm studying this topic and in Portugal at Universidade de Coimbra, I wanted to ask if I could connect with you maybe later on, or if you could leave me your email address. I already sent you a Facebook friend request, so yeah, that was my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sharing my email address right now with everybody. You're welcome to email me any questions you might have. And yes, please do.
Thank you.
If you need an advisor, let me know.
I have already two, but you're definitely more aware of the topic, so that's why I want to also get in contact with you.
More than welcome.
Obrigada.
De nada.
Any other questions from the floor or comments, last comments? We need to close. Don't be shy. So I don't know, then I'm just gonna say that we're gonna upload this sometime this week, this webinar online, and share it with everybody. We have everybody's email who's here, and we're also gonna share the slides from Anna. Yeah, I think I just want to say also from just a comment that's just being made right now is it's a process and we need to give each other time. And there's like issues issues of oppression have been happening for way more than 600 years through colonialism, and we shouldn't have this expectation that we can resolve them overnight. This solution-based mindset of we can do it now, or it's already been done. So I find that it is though important that within the eco-village movement, like people from the North are able to put themselves in this uncomfortable spaces of having to listen to the voices of the global South, and also having this sensitivity of just knowing that just maybe the global North doesn't have all the solutions. Exactly. It doesn't know it all. And I find this is also where the difficulty is, this patriarchal mindset of we know it all. So it's like a need for intellectual humility.
Exactly.
Yeah, the very deep need for intellectual humility of just maybe you just don't know it all, and there's things that you might be uncomfortable facing, but we need to face them, especially if we have this dream of saying we're creating a new world together. Yeah, so hence we are doing these webinars and we are creating these spaces, and I'm hoping that and more people in your communities, wherever you are in the world, that you are able to open people from different cultures and just create a space of listening, and just starting by listening. And you might have to listen for years before you even understand what's being said to you or what's being related to you, but just open yourself into being uncomfortable and being okay with being uncomfortable and create spaces of listening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to say that I uploaded Commenting at the Borderlands. Someone said that instead of uploading the two articles, the one on the West Bank and Commenting at the Borderland, I only uploaded the former. So I uploaded Commenting at the Borderland. You can access it through on the chat window.
Okay, if you can send them to me as well, Anna, then I can also distribute them.
Okay,
yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, so should we close in? And I just want to say thank you so much, Anna, for saying yes to this. And I thank every one of you for showing up, and wherever you are in the world, thank you so much for saying yes to this journey. And yeah, thank you. And have a good day, a good morning, or a good evening, wherever you are in the world.
And viva la Pachamama.
Yes, and lots of love. Let's go out there and co-create, and
absolutely.
Yes, and get over the illusion of separation.
Absolutely. And see you soon in Barcelona, dear Auntie.
Yes, 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 yes.
Okay. Ciao.
Thank you. Ciao.
Yep, ciao.
Thank you.
Thank you.